Yuna Kim stared at the bright red numbers on her screen. 42% in advanced mathematics, 38% in quantum physics, 29% in strategic planning. The test results glowed like warning lights in the dim classroom of the Galactic Military Academy. She sank lower in her seat at the back of the room. Round her, other students were celebrating their scores. The tall, blue-skinned Valerians whispered excitedly about their perfect marks. The silver-scaled three needy compared their near-perfect calculations. Even the small, furry Zephyrians were happy with their results. Yuna was the only human in advanced tactical theory class. She was also the only one failing. Professor Dakin, ancient Valerian with wise purple eyes, cleared his throat. Class dismissed. Remember, your final examination is in 3 days. This test will determine who advances to senior year. The students began packing their things. Yuna moved slowly, hoping no one would notice her red scores still displayed on her screen. But luck was not with her today. "Hey, Earth Girl," called Taiho Nam, a Threnody student who always sat in the front row. His silver scales caught the light as he turned to look at her. "What did you get on the test?" Several students stopped to listen. Yuna felt her face grow hot. "It was okay," she said quietly. Taiho's large black eyes narrowed. "Show us your score." "Okay." "Leave her alone, Taiho," said Hannah Choi, Yuna's Valerian roommate. Hannah's blue skin had turned darker, which meant she was angry. "The scores are private." "Nothing is private when someone does not belong here," Taiho said. He stepped closer to Yuna's desk. "We all know humans only got into the academy because of politics. Your species made some deal with the council." "That is not true," Hannah said, but her voice was not strong. Taiho laughed. "Look at her grades. Hannah, look at how she sits in every class like she does not understand anything, because she does not understand anything." Other students were gathering now. Kuda could see some nodding in agreement with Taiho. Her chest felt tight. "Humans are not smart enough for the academy," continued Taiho. "They think with their emotions, not their brains. They cannot do real mathematics. They cannot understand proper strategy. They are just ... primitive." Yuna closed her test screen and stood up quickly. Her chair made a loud scraping sound. "I have to go," she whispered. She walked fast toward the door. Behind her, she could hear Taiho saying something else, but she did not want to listen. Some students laughed. The sound followed her into the hallway. The corridors of the academy were always busy. Students from dozens of species moved between classes. The academy was built inside a huge dome on the moon Kepler-4 for to see. Through the clear ceiling, Yuna could see the stars and the bright blue planet the moon orbited. She found an empty bench near a window and sat down. Her hands were shaking a little. She pulled out her personal communicator and looked at her grades again. Every subject was the same story. Physics, biology, history, strategy, languages. All failing. All red numbers that meant she was not good enough. In 3 days, she would take her final examinations. If she failed those 2, she would be sent back to Earth, the first human to be kicked out of the Galactic Military Academy. She would prove that Taiho was right about her species. She looked up to see Professor Minho Park walking toward her. He was the only human teacher at the academy. He taught military history, which was one of the few classes where Yuna was not completely lost. "Professor Park," she said, trying to sound normal. He sat down next to her on the bench. Professor Park was older, maybe 50 years old, with gray hair and kind eyes. "I heard what happened in class today," he said. Yuna felt embarrassed. The whole academy probably knows by now. "Some students talk too much," Professor Park said. "But that is not important. What is important is how you feel about your studies." Yuna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I try so hard, Professor. I study every night. Hannah helps me with everything. But I still cannot understand the lessons. When Professor Dakin explains quantum mechanics, my brain just ... stops working. When they show us battle formations, I cannot see what they see. Professor Park nodded. The Academy teaches a very specific way of thinking, very logical, very mathematical, very structured, and I am not good at any of those things, Yuna said. Maybe, Professor Park said, or maybe you think in a different way. Yuna looked at him with confusion. What do you mean? Tell me something, Yuna. When you were on Earth, what were you good at? She thought about it. I do not know. Normal things, I guess. I was good at sports. I liked to fix broken things. I was good at helping people solve problems. What kind of problems? Just everyday problems. Like when my little brother could not find his toy, I would figure out where he left it. Or when my mother's car would not start, I would know what to check. Simple things. Professor Park smiled. Those are not simple things, Yuna. Those are very complex things. Finding lost objects requires understanding how people think and move. Fixing machines requires seeing patterns and connections. Helping people requires understanding emotions and motivations. But those are not real subjects, Yuna said. They did not give grades for those things. No, Professor Park agreed. They do not give grades for those things. But maybe they should. He stood up from the bench. Yuna, I want you to remember something. Intelligence comes in many forms. The Academy values one type of intelligence, mathematical intelligence, logical intelligence. But there are other types too. Like what? Creative intelligence, social intelligence, practical intelligence, intuitive intelligence. He looked out at the stars through the dome. Sometimes the most important intelligence is the kind that cannot be measured by tests. Yuna wanted to believe him, but her test scores were still red numbers in her mind. That does not help me pass my examinations, Professor. Maybe not, he said, but it might help you understand that failing a test does not mean you are a failure. After he left, Yuna sat alone on the bench for a long time. Students walked past her, laughing and talking in their various languages. She watched them and wondered if any of them had ever felt as lost as she did. Her communicator buzzed. It was a message from Hannah asking where she was. Yuna sighed and got up from the bench. She had to go back to her room and try to study again. In 3 days, she would take tests that would decide her future. But as she walked through the corridors, Professor Park's words stayed in her mind. Different types of intelligence. She did not know what that meant exactly, but something about it felt important. She did not know that in 3 days she would find out exactly what he meant. She did not know that her failure in every academic subject was about to become the thing that saved everyone's life. For now, she just walked back to her room, carrying her red test scores and wondering if she would ever be smart enough for the stars. 3 days later, Yuna sat in the examination hall with her final test in front of her. The Advanced Strategic Planning exam was supposed to be the hardest test of the year. Round her, hundreds of students from dozens of species worked quietly on their screens. She looked at the first question and felt her heart sink. It was about calculating supply lines for a fleet of starships. The mathematics involved made her head hurt just looking at it. She had studied for 3 days straight, but the numbers still looked like alien writing to her. Yuna tried to focus. She read the question again slowly. A fleet of 200 ships needed food, fuel, and weapons for a 6-month journey. How much of each supply would they need, and what was the most efficient way to transport it? She started writing numbers, trying to remember the formulas Hannah had taught her, but halfway through, she realized she was making mistakes. Big mistakes. She erased everything and started again. That was when the alarms began. A loud, piercing sound filled the examination hall. Red lights flashed on the walls. Students looked up from their tests with confusion. Remain calm, announced Professor The king from the front of the room. This is just a fire drill. Please save your work and proceed to the evacuation points. Una felt relief wash over her. She was failing the test anyway. At least now, she would not have to finish it right away. Students began standing up and moving toward the exits. Fire drills happened once a month at the academy. Everyone knew the routine. Go to your assigned meeting point. Wait for the all clear signal. Return to class. But as Una joined the crowd, moving through the corridors, something felt wrong. The usual evacuation routes were blocked. Academy security guards stood at the entrances to stairwells that should have been open. They were directing everyone toward the central courtyard instead. Why are we not going to the usual places? Hannah asked as they walked together. I do not know, Una said. She noticed that the security guards looked tense. Their hands were near their weapons. The crowd moved slowly through the main corridors. Thousands of students and teachers were all heading to the same place. The central courtyard was large, but not large enough for the entire academy. Commander Jiwan Lee's voice came over the communication system. All academy personnel proceed immediately to the central courtyard. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Students began talking louder. Some sounded scared. Una felt a cold feeling in her stomach. Not a drill? Anna whispered. What does that mean? They reached the central courtyard. It was already packed with people. Students pressed together in groups by species. Teachers stood near the edges, trying to keep everyone calm. Una looked up to the dome above them. The stars looked normal. The blue planet still hung in space, like always. Everything seemed peaceful. Then she saw the first explosion. A bright flash lit up the main academy tower. The sound came a second later, a deep boom that shook the ground. Students screamed. Some fell down as the ground shook again. Everyone stay calm, Commander Jiwan Lee shouted through her communicator. But her voice did not sound calm at all. More explosions followed. Fires started in several buildings around the courtyard. Through the smoke, Una saw something that made her blood freeze. Ships were coming down from space. Black ships with a design she had never seen before. They moved fast and silent, landing on the academy buildings like deadly birds. We are under attack, someone screamed. Panic spread through the crowd. Students pushed against each other, trying to run. There was nowhere to go. The courtyard was surrounded by buildings, and all the exits were blocked. The black ships opened. Soldiers in dark armor poured out. They carried weapons that glowed with blue energy. They moved in perfect formation, surrounding the courtyard. In minutes, Una grabbed Hannah's arm. Stay close to me, she said. What is happening? Hannah was shaking. Who are these people? I do not know, Una said. But she was watching the soldiers carefully. Something about the way they moved bothered her. They were too organized, too ready, like they knew exactly what they were doing. The soldiers formed a circle around the crowd. Their weapons were pointed at the students and teachers. No one moved. No one spoke. Then a larger ship landed in the center of the courtyard. A door opened and a figure stepped out. It was tall and covered in dark armor. When it spoke, its voice was translated by a machine. Students and faculty of the Galactic Military Academy, the voice said. You are now prisoners of the Korthok hegemony. Do not attempt to resist or escape. You will be hurt if you try. Commander Jiwan Lee pushed through the crowd. I am the security commander of this academy. By what right do you attack a neutral educational facility? The armored figure turned toward her. Kyla, by the right of superior force, Commander. Your academy trains future military leaders from dozens of species. That makes it a threat to Korthok expansion. This is a school, Commander Lee said. These are students, not soldiers. They are hostages, the figure replied. It raised one armored hand. More soldiers moved forward. carrying equipment. They began setting up devices around the courtyard. Yuna did not know what the devices were, but they looked dangerous. "Here are our terms," the Korthok commander announced. "Your academy computers contain navigation charts for every major star system in this sector. Okay? They also contain detailed information about the military capabilities of member species. You will provide us with complete access to these databases." "Information is classified," Commander Lee said. "I cannot give it to you." "Then you and your students will die," the commander said simply. "You have 1 hour to decide." The crowd around Yuna was silent now. Even the smallest sounds seemed loud. Someone was crying quietly. Someone else was praying in a language she did not recognize. Yuna looked around at the faces near her. Taiho was standing with other Threnody students. Hill's silver scales were pale with fear. Hannah was holding onto her arms so tightly it hurt. These were the smartest beings in the galaxy. Students who could solve mathematical problems that hurt Yuna's brain to think about. Professors who understood sciences she had never heard of. But right now, quote, they all looked as scared and helpless as she felt. The Korthok soldiers stood like statues around the courtyard. Their weapons hummed with energy. Above them, more black ships circled the academy like vultures. Yuna realized that this was not a random attack. Someone had planned this carefully. Someone had known about the academy's location, its security systems, its evacuation procedures. Someone had betrayed them. The fire drill had been a trap. Instead of escaping to safety, they had all been herded into one place like sheep for slaughter. Commander Lee was talking quietly with other academy officers. They looked desperate. Yuna could tell they were trying to think of a way out, but there was no way out. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and outgunned. In 1 hour, the Korthok commander would want an answer. Give up the military secrets, or watch everyone die. Yuna closed her eyes and tried to think, but her mind felt empty. This was not like a test where she could at least try to remember formulas. This was real danger, and she had no idea what to do about it. Around her, the greatest minds in the galaxy were just as lost as she was. The hour was counting down. 30 minutes had passed since the Korthok commander gave his ultimatum. Around the courtyard, students sat in tight groups, whispering to each other. Some were crying, others stared at the ground in silence. Yuna watched the Korthok soldiers carefully. She had been studying them since they arrived, and she was starting to notice things that others seemed to miss. The soldiers moved in patterns. Every 5 minutes, 2 of them would walk around the edge of the courtyard. They always went in the same direction. They always stopped at the same spots. They always took exactly 3 minutes to complete their patrol. The soldiers also had a communication system. Small lights on their helmets would flash when they talked to each other. Blue light meant normal communication. Red light meant urgent messages. She had seen red lights only twice, both times when new ships arrived. Hannah whispered next to her. "What are you doing?" "Watching," Yuna said quietly. "Watching what?" "Everything." Hannah looked confused, but she did not ask more questions. Around them, other students were having different conversations. A group of Valerian students were working on mathematical calculations. They were trying to figure out the exact number of Korthok soldiers and their weapon capabilities. The numbers covered several tablets, but they did not seem to be reaching any useful conclusions. The Threnody students were analyzing the attack patterns. They had created detailed charts showing where the Korthok ships had landed and how the soldiers had positioned themselves. Their analysis was very impressive, but it did not suggest any way to escape. The Zephyrian students were using their emotional sensing abilities to read the Korthok soldiers. They reported that the soldiers felt confident and calm. It's not helpful information for planning a rescue. All around the courtyard, the smartest beings in the galaxy were doing what they did best: calculating, analyzing, thinking logically about their situation, but none of them were acting. Yuna stood up slowly. "I need to move around," she told Hannah. "Be careful," Hannah said. "Do not let the soldiers notice you." Yuna walked casually toward the edge of the crowd. She pretended to be looking for someone, but she was really studying the academy buildings. Around the courtyard, she had lived at the academy for 8 months. She knew these buildings well, not from studying their architecture or memorizing their layouts, but from walking through them every day, from getting lost in the corridors during her first weeks, from finding shortcuts between classes. The main administration building had a service entrance on the second floor. The engineering building had an old maintenance tunnel that connected to the power systems. The library had a loading dock that was usually empty after evening classes. Most students never noticed these things. They used the main entrances and followed the marked paths. But Yuna had always been curious about the places where normal people did not go now. As she looked at the buildings with new eyes, she began to see possibilities. "Miss," a harsh voice said behind her. Yuna turned around. One of the Korthok soldiers was pointing his weapon at her. "Turn to the group," the soldier said through his translator. "No wandering is permitted." "Sorry," Yuna said. She walked back toward Hannah, but she had seen what she needed to see. The soldiers were positioned to watch the main exits and windows, but they were not watching the service areas. They did not know about the maintenance tunnels or the forgotten passages that connected different buildings. More importantly, they seemed to think that all the humans and aliens in the courtyard were the same. They expected everyone to sit quietly and wait for rescue or death. They did not understand that some people think differently. "Professor Park," Yuna said quietly as she passed the group of human teachers. Professor Park looked up at her. His eyes were tired, but he still looked alert. "I need to talk to you," she whispered. Privately, Professor Park glanced around. Several other teachers were nearby, including Commander Lee. They were discussing something in low voices. "What is it, Yuna?" he asked. She knelt down next to him. "Professor, what did you do before you became a teacher?" He looked surprised by the question. "Why do you ask?" "Please, it is important." Professor Park was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I was in the Earth Defense Force, Special Operations." "Why?" Yuna felt excitement growing in her chest. "I think there might be a way out of here, but I need help from someone who knows about real fighting, not just classroom strategy." "Yuna, this is not a game," Professor Park said. "These soldiers are dangerous. Any attempt to escape could get people killed." "People are going to die anyway," Yuna said. "Korthok commander is not going to let us live, even if Commander Lee gives him what he wants. We are witnesses. We know about their ships and their weapons." Professor Park stared at her. "How do you know that?" "'Cause that is what I would do," Yuna said simply. "I was attacking a place and taking hostages. I would not leave anyone alive to report what happened." Professor Park was quiet for a long time around them. Other students continued their calculations and analysis, but Yuna could see in his eyes that he was thinking about what she had said. "What do you have in mind?" he asked finally. Yuna looked around the courtyard. "The soldiers think we are all the same, smart students who will sit quietly and follow orders. They do not expect anyone to fight back, because fighting back would be illogical," Professor Park said. "We are outnumbered and outgunned." "Yes," Yuna said. "It would be completely illogical." "That is why it might work," she began, explaining what she had observed. The patrol patterns, the communication systems, the blind spots in their security, the service entrances and maintenance tunnels that the Korthok did not know about. As she talked, Professor Park's expression changed. He began to look less like a scared teacher and more like the soldier he used to be. "You want to organize resistance," he said. "I want to create chaos," Yuna corrected. "The Korthok have planned for everything logical: surrender or defiance, negotiation or direct attack. They have not planned for something completely unexpected." "Like what?" "Yuna, smiled for the first time since the attack began, like a failing student who thinks with her emotions instead of her brain. Professor Park looked at her carefully. Una, what you're suggesting is extremely dangerous. Most of the people here have never been in real combat. They could panic. They could make mistakes. They are already panicking, Una said. And the biggest mistake would be doing nothing. She pointed to where Commander Lee was still talking with other officers. They are trying to find a logical solution to an impossible problem. But sometimes the answer is not logic. Sometimes the answer is doing something so crazy that nobody expects it. Professor Park followed her gaze. Academy officers looked desperate. Careful planning and military training had not prepared them for this situation. What makes you think your plan will work? He asked. Una was quiet for a moment. Okay, then she said, because I have been failing every test in this academy. Okay? I do not think like everyone else here. Maybe that is exactly what we need right now, Professor. Park looked around the courtyard one more time. Students and teachers sitting in groups, waiting for someone else to save them. Orcs soldiers standing guard, confident in their control. Tell me your plan, he said. As Una began to explain her ideas, she felt something she had never felt before in a classroom. She felt like she knew what she was doing for the first time since arriving at the academy. Her different way of thinking was exactly what the situation required. The hour was almost up, but the real test was just beginning. The Orcs commander's hour was almost over when the first explosion happened. It was not a big explosion. It's a small flash of light from the engineering building, followed by a power outage that darkened half the academy. The Orcs soldiers looked around in confusion as their communication lights flickered and died. What was that? The commander demanded through his translator. None of his soldiers had an answer. The explosion had come from inside a building they thought was empty. Their sensors showed no movement, no life signs, nothing that could have caused the blast. But Una knew exactly what had happened. 20 minutes earlier, she had sent 3 volunteers through the maintenance tunnels with instructions to create a distraction to Zephyrian students who were small enough to crawl through the tight spaces, and 1 human engineering student who knew how to make chemistry supplies explode safely. The power outage was just the beginning. Phase 2, Professor Park whispered to the students sitting near him. Across the courtyard, more volunteers began their work. They moved slowly, casually, pretending to comfort scared friends while actually passing along supplies they had gathered from their backpacks and pockets. The Valerian student had a laser pointer from her physics class. Tina's student had metal tools from his mechanical engineering kit. Several humans had personal items that could be turned into weapons or distractions. Una had learned something important about the academy students. They were all very smart, but they had never learned to think like fighters. They could calculate the physics of an explosion, but they had never thought about using chemistry supplies to make one. But when someone explained exactly what to do, they learned very quickly. Movement in Sector 7. One of the Orcs soldiers reported to his commander. The commander turned his attention to the library building, where shadows were moving behind the windows. He sent for soldiers to investigate. That was exactly what Una had hoped for. The soldiers found nothing in the library except some books knocked off their shelves. But while they were searching the empty building, they were not watching the courtyard. Now, Professor Park said quietly, a group of students near the south wall suddenly scattered in different directions. They screamed and ran as if something had frightened them. The Orcs soldiers pointed their weapons at the running students, shouting orders to stop in the confusion. Nobody noticed 3 students slipping through a service door that had been left slightly open. Nobody saw them disappearing into the building that housed the academy's main computer systems. Control your prisoners. The Orcs commander ordered his soldiers. Shoot anyone who runs. But as soon as the soldiers focused on the south wall, students near the north wall began their own distraction. They started singing loudly in their native languages. making so much noise that the soldiers could not hear their own communication devices. The commander was getting angry. His perfect plan was falling apart, and he did not understand why. His soldiers were trained to handle logical resistance, direct attacks, organized defiance, negotiation attempts. They were not trained to handle complete chaos. "Sir," one of his soldiers reported, "we are getting multiple reports of movement throughout the academy. Small groups, acting independently. No clear pattern or objective. Then hunt them down." The commander snapped. "All of them." He sent more soldiers into the buildings. Within minutes, half of his force was scattered throughout the academy, chasing shadows and investigating false alarms that left fewer soldiers watching the main group of hostages. Yuna caught Professor Park's eye and nodded. It was time for the most dangerous part of their plan. "Commander Lee," Professor Park called out loudly. Commander Lee looked over at him. She had been watching the chaos with growing confusion, not understanding what was happening. "I think it is time to surrender," Professor Park said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We cannot fight these soldiers. We should give them what they want." Several students gasped. Others began arguing loudly. Commander Lee looked shocked. "Professor Park, we cannot give them access to classified information," she said. "It is better than dying," Professor Park replied. "I am just a teacher. I do not want to be a hero." The argument grew louder. More students joined in, taking sides. Some agreed with Professor Park. Others supported Commander Lee. The noise level in the courtyard rose dramatically. The Korthok commander watched the argument with satisfaction. And this was what he had expected. Panic, fear, and finally surrender. He did not notice that the argument was being performed mostly by humans. He did not realize that the loudest voices were all coming from people who had been coached on exactly what to say and when to say it. Most importantly, he did not see the small group of students who used the distraction to slip away toward the administration building. "Enough," the commander finally said. "I am tired of waiting. Commander Lee, you will give me access to your computers now, or I will start shooting your students." Commander Lee looked around the courtyard. Many of her students were missing now, but the Korthok soldiers had not noticed. They were too focused on the argument and the chaos. "Hi, I need time to think," she said. "You have had time," the commander replied. He pointed his weapon at a young Valerian student. "Give me the access codes, or this one dies." That was when the academy's main computer system exploded. The blast was much bigger than the first one. It lit up the night sky and shook the entire academy. Alarms began wailing throughout the complex. Emergency lights flickered on and off. "What is happening?" the commander shouted. His soldiers were trying to report, but their communication system was not working properly. The computer explosion had damaged the academy's main power grid, and the Korthok equipment was having trouble adapting to the fluctuating energy levels. "Sir, the computer center has been destroyed," one soldier finally managed to report. "Navigation databases are gone. All the military information has been wiped out." The commander turned to stare at Commander Lee. "You did this," he said. "No," Commander Lee said honestly. "I did not." But she was beginning to understand what had happened. Someone had organized a resistance right under the noses of the Korthok soldiers. Someone had turned her confused, panicked students into an effective fighting force. Someone who thought in ways that military training had never taught her to expect. "Find whoever did this," the commander ordered his soldiers. "Find them and bring them to me." But his soldiers were having problems. Academy was dark now, lit only by emergency lighting. The buildings were full of smoke from the explosions. Strange noises echoed through the corridors as hidden students continued their sabotage work. Worst of all, the Korthok battle computers were giving contradictory advice. Their tactical analysis systems could not predict what the humans would do next, because what the humans were doing made no logical sense. Every time the soldiers thought they understood the pattern changed. Every time they sent forces to one location, something happened somewhere else. In the middle of the chaos, Yuna moved through the shadows like she belonged there. She was not the smartest student at the academy. She could not solve complex mathematical equations or memorize detailed battle strategies, but she understood something that all the brilliant minds around her had missed. Sometimes the best plan is to have no plan at all. Sometimes the most effective strategy is to do things that make no sense to anyone, including yourself. The Korthok commander had prepared for every logical response to his attack. He had not prepared for complete, beautiful, effective chaos, as explosions continued to rock the academy and his soldiers chased phantoms through dark corridors. He began to realize that he was losing control of the situation. He was being defeated by failing students who did not know enough to surrender when they were beaten. The battle was far from over. But for the first time since the attack began, the academy had hope. The rescue ships arrived just as Yuna was setting off her biggest explosion yet. She had spent the last hour crawling through maintenance tunnels with 2 other students, rigging the academy's central power core with every explosive chemical they could find. It was not a sophisticated plan. Any first-year engineering student could have told her that the explosion would be too big, too dangerous, and completely unpredictable. But Yuna was not an engineering student. She was a failing student who had stopped caring about doing things the right way. The explosion lit up space for miles around the academy. The shockwave knocked down Korthok soldiers throughout the complex. Most importantly, it sent a massive energy pulse that overloaded the sensors on every Korthok ship in the area for 10 crucial minutes. The enemy was blind and deaf. That was when Admiral Soman Kong arrived with the human rescue fleet. The human ships dropped out of hyperspace like avenging angels. They had been 3 days away when Commander Lee's distress signal finally reached them. But they had pushed their engines beyond safe limits to get here in time. Admiral Kong took one look at the chaos around the academy and made a decision that would have shocked any military strategist. Instead of forming careful battle lines and following proper attack procedures, she ordered her ships to charge straight into the enemy formation. It was exactly the kind of reckless, emotional decision that aliens expected from humans. It was also exactly what the situation required. The Korthok ships were still recovering from Yuna's explosion. Their battle computers were trying to make sense of conflicting sensor data. The commanders were dealing with reports of impossible resistance from inside the academy. They were not ready for a fleet of human ships that attacked like angry hornets. The space battle was brief and decisive. The Korthok had superior technology, but the humans had superior motivation. Every human captain knew that students were trapped inside the academy. Every human pilot was willing to take crazy risks to save them. Within an hour, the surviving Korthok ships were retreating toward hyperspace. Their carefully planned attack had turned into a disaster on the academy. The Korthok ground forces tried to make one last stand. Their commander gathered his remaining soldiers in the courtyard and demanded that Commander Lee surrender, or he would execute every hostage. That was when Professor Park walked out of the shadows behind him. The professor was no longer pretending to be just a teacher. He moved like the Special Forces soldier he had once been. In his hand was a weapon he had taken from a Korthok soldier during the chaos. "I think you're the one who should surrender," Professor Park said quietly. The Korthok commander spun around, but it was too late. More academy staff emerged from hiding places around the courtyard. They were not soldiers, but they had learned quickly. They carried improvised weapons and moved with the confidence of people who had already won. The remaining Korthok soldiers found themselves surrounded by the very people they had been guarding. Somehow, during the hours of chaos and confusion, the prisoners had become the captors. How? the court the commander asked through his translator. How did you do this? Professor Park smiled. We had a very good teacher. He looked across the courtyard to where Yuna was sitting with the other students. She was covered in dust and smoke from her time in the tunnels. Her clothes were torn and dirty. She looked nothing like a hero, but she was alive, and so was everyone else. The rescue teams arrived an hour later. Human Marines swept through the academy, making sure it was secure. Medical teams treated the wounded. Engineers began assessing the damage. Admiral Kong herself came down to the academy to oversee the operation. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She moved through the courtyard, checking on students and talking to the staff. When she reached Yuna, she stopped. Huh? You are the student who organized the resistance, Admiral Kong said. It was not a question. I just did what seemed right, Yuna replied. Admiral Kong studied her carefully. Professor Park tells me you failed most of your academic subjects. Yuna felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. Yes, Admiral. I was not very good at school. Interesting, Admiral Kong said. Tell me, what grade would you give yourself for your performance today? Yuna thought about it. She had saved lives, defeated a superior enemy, and protected the academy. But she had also destroyed half the campus and put countless people in danger with her reckless plans. I do not know, she said honestly. I broke a lot of rules. I did things that could have gotten people killed. My plans were not logical or safe. No, Admiral Kong agreed. They were not logical or safe. They were brilliant. She sat down next to Yuna on the bench. Round them, rescue workers continued their tasks. Students were being reunited with worried families via communication links. The academy was slowly returning to normal. Yuna, Admiral Kong said, I have been a military officer for 30 years. I have studied every famous battle in galactic history. I have learned from the greatest strategic minds of dozens of species. She paused and looked out at the damaged academy buildings. But I've never seen anything like what you did today. You turned academic failure into military victory. You made weakness into strength. You won a battle that every computer simulation said was impossible to win. I just thought differently, Yuna said. Exactly, Admiral Kong replied. Lee, you thought like a human, not like a Valerian mathematician or a Threnody strategist or a Zephyrian empath. You thought like a human being facing an impossible situation and refusing to give up. She stood up and looked down at Yuna. The Galaxy Defense Command has a special operations division. We handle situations that are too complex for normal military thinking. Situations that require creative solutions and unconventional approaches. Yuna felt her heart start beating faster. What are you saying, Admiral? I'm saying that we need officers who can think the way you think. Officers who can solve problems that have no logical solutions. Officers who can win battles that should not be winnable. Admiral Kong held out her hand. Would you be interested in a different kind of education, Cadet Kim? Yuna looked around the courtyard one more time. Students were gathered in groups, talking excitedly about what had happened. Many of them were looking at her with new respect. Even Tayo had nodded to her earlier, acknowledging what she had done. But the most important thing was that they were all alive. The academy would be rebuilt. Classes would resume. The brilliant minds of the galaxy would continue their education. And maybe, in some small way, they had learned something new about the value of thinking differently. Admiral, Yuna said, taking her hand. I would like that very much. Later that night, after the rescue ships had left and the academy had returned to something like normal, Yuna sat in her room looking at her test scores one more time. Mathematics, 42%. Physics, 38%. Strategic planning, 29%. The numbers had not changed. She was still behind in every subject that the academy considered important. But next to those scores, Professor Park had added a new entry to her record: practical leadership. 100% crisis management, 100% creative problem solving, 100%. Yuna smiled and closed her computer. Tomorrow, she would start a new kind of education, one that valued the things she was actually good at. She had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes, the skills that matter most are the ones that cannot be measured by any test. Sometimes, the best students are the ones who fail at everything except the things that really count. And sometimes, being different is exactly what the galaxy needs.